Welcome back. It's ChRAWnology. It's an episode-by-episode recap of WWF's glory days. Some of them. And we're going one by one with every single episode of Monday Night Raw with me, casual wrestling fan Dave Thackera, and him, he's a super wrestling fan. His name is Neil Trauma. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Dave. I am so excited today. I am just so ready to spend my riches because you, good sir, owe me $1.
All right. This is episode 7 with carryover from episode 6. Not really, but let's set the stage.
Yeah, that's why you owe me the $1. There is no carryover.
When we signed off the air last time in episode 6, The Undertaker was battling Skinner, and Vince McMahon assured us that even though the match was still going on and they were going off the air, that they would tell us what happened this week. And that didn't happen.
I even went so far as to load up on the WWE Network WWF Superstars from the weekend before this show, just to make sure that they didn't show the Undertaker Skinner match on Superstars instead. And they didn't. Now, I don't know what happened on Mania, and I don't know what happened on Challenge, and whatever other goofy shows were around at the time. But I think we could say with fair certainty that you owe me $1 because they did not make any mention of the Undertaker versus Skinner. And even sadder news, Dave, I hate to tell you this, but you are literally never going to find out what happened in that match because the Skinner is never seen again on WWF television. That was his last appearance, getting cut off in the middle of his match against The Undertaker. At least he went out in the main event.
Let's set the stage for where we are. Episode 7, March 1st, 1993. In the real world, the Waco siege was happening in Texas, and everyone in the world would eventually get to know the name David Koresh. And men everywhere wondered why he wanted multiple wives, and women are like, that guy? Also, this episode aired 3 days before the very first ESPY Awards on ESPN. That was the one with Jimmy Valvano's completely amazing epic speech, the one that everyone should watch multiple times in their life just to remind them of the blessings that we all have. And this was, I don't know if you know this was the same day, March 1st, 1993, that the Cranberries released their epic and wonderful album, Everybody Else Is Doing It, Why Can't We?, featuring those earworms, Linger and Dreams.
Hey, those are 2 great songs, which makes them significantly better than this episode of Raw, which was very much not great.
We started with Rob Bartlett as Elvis. Yeah, if Neil didn't tell you that it was a bad episode, that should have set the stage right there. This is 1993. The Elvis stamp, the 29-cent model, was everywhere. It was being released, and it was just taking over postage. Not really sure why. I don't know why we were celebrating Elvis. I'm sure there was a reason, but regardless. Rob Bartlett was Elvis. Macho Man was in bright red and silver. It was like a bedazzled Ohio State uniform. And we got right to the action for the WWF Championship with Bret Hart taking on one of the Headshrinkers.
I got to jump in here, Dave, before we get to Bret Hart and the Headshrinker. Now, I've seen all of these Raws. We've made this point. That's kind of the whole gimmick behind this podcast. You've seen almost none of them until we get to the, Attitude Era Glory Days. I've seen them all. But it's not like I sit there watching them all constantly. Like, I've seen them. I saw most of them when they aired, and I've gone back on the network and seen some of them. Sometimes I get in the mood to throw some shows on, and I'll just pick a random date, watch a few Raws, have it on the background, whatever. So I knew going into this podcast that Rob Bartlett sucked. And I feel like I've been giving him, even though we rag on him every show because he always does something terrible,
Justifiably
he
rag on
hasn't actually been that atrocious, I feel like, on every one of these shows. On the first Raw, he was hideous. There were 1 or 2 other ones where he just said cringeworthy things. But generally, it's just that. It's like a cringe and a why is he there, and he's not actively terrible. But I knew that somewhere we were going to come to the show where he did the entire show as a bad Elvis impression. And I knew that it was hideous, and we finally reached that point. So this is the point where I will stop apologizing for Bartlett. I think this is definitely where he jumps the shark from just being a kind of terrible announcer to being actively hideous and bringing down the show.
And he stayed in character like the whole episode. It's not like he jumped in and out and was just wearing an outfit. This is a man who was dressed like Elvis, who kept doing the hey man, hey, what's going on there, man? You got any food there, man? For the entire episode.
Yeah, it's one bad note impression, for an hour straight. Like, it's just so hideous. And I can't remember now as we talk about this. Have we been on the show where he does Mike Tyson? Has that happened yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, then I will not spoil it,
Ugh.
but there's something worse coming. But anyway, the Bret Hart Fatu match was good. Yeah, Fatu gets to be the head shrinker that gets the title match. And I was all ready to say to you, like, I was all ready to make this joke. Like, what did Fatu, the head shrinker, ever do to earn a WWF championship match? But then, in the interest of being a broadcast journalist, Dave, I went back and looked at the history of WWE.com and checked out all the ring results from late 92 into 1993. And believe it or not, up to this point, head shrinker Fatu was undefeated in the World Wrestling Federation, and he was the one who secured the pinfall victory for the head shrinkers in virtually every match they've participated in since joining the company in 1992. So, all things considered, Fatu deserving of this title
Not
match.
only deserving of the title match, but Fatu, I mean, this is the future Rikishi, right? This is a WWE Hall of Famer. This is a guy who gets a title shot that turns out to be strange in the moment, but in retrospect, almost makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Fatu is there for the long haul. Like, we're going to be talking Fatu in various incarnations of different gimmicks from now until, like, I mean, I'm thinking like 2004, 2005. He is around in the WWF like straight. Like, I'm sure there's injury breaks and there's like some times where he's not around, but he is basically in the company straight through for, well over a decade. So, so this is the start of a good run here. Yeah, it is the future Rikishi. It is, Fatu of the famous Hanoi wrestling family. He is a cousin of Yokozuna. So even though they don't actually say that, that even makes sense. It's like his cousin is softening up Bret Hart for the title match at WrestleMania, which would have been a great storyline if they actually said something about it. Unfortunately, they didn't. But yeah, he gets a good match. Gets a good match with Bret Hart here. I liked
It was
this.
a decent match. Like, we talk about squash matches all the time where the big guy just comes out and ruins some guy named Jake Smith. But this is like the total opposite of that. It's the babyface just gets wrecked and gets worked over for like 10, 12 minutes before coming back to win. I tried for minutes to think of like what the term for that would be, like the opposite of squash match. And then I just realized that's just professional wrestling. That's what-
Yeah, I mean, this is a great like underneath babyface champion. Like, yeah. I mean, Fatu gets the heat for a long time. Brett probably gave Fatu too much since I mean it is Fatu. He's probably getting a little too much. The WWF champion probably shouldn't have let himself be fight from underneath for 10 minutes straight. But ultimately he gets the win. Though there is a head scratching spot at the end. Hey, a head shrinker head scratching spot. Now, the spot at the end of the match, Dave, where Samu and Fatu switch places in the ring. The referee is distracted by Afa, the manager on the outside, and Samu takes his Fatu's place in the ring because he's fresh and gets a near fall on Bret Hart. I do have to ask, what was the head shrinker's plan? Like, what if Samu got the pin? Is Samu the WWF champion? Does he need to somehow sneak away so that Fatu could sneak back in and get the championship? Did they think they were going to let that fly? This was probably not the best logic on the part of the whole head shrinker clan here.
Listen, if the referee doesn't notice that guy B wins the belt instead of guy A, then it wouldn't be that much of a reach to just say guy B hands the belt to guy A is the champion, and no one ever mentions it again.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think that wouldn't have flown. Although it does remind me of a great moment in WCW where they did it. This was in the Vince Russo days near the end of the company when everything was hideous. They did a match where the championship was hidden inside a box and you had to open a bunch of boxes. And if you open the one with the title in it, you won it. Well, in typical WCW fashion, the title belt fell out of the box before the guy who was supposed to get the title could get it. And then the ring announcer had to pick it up and hand it to him. So the question is, like, doesn't that mean the ring announcer is the WCW champion now since he's the one who got the title out of the box?
Well, we'll talk about that extensively on our next podcast, Nitro Retro, coming to you.
I will retire, Dave. I will retire before you make me watch every episode of Nitro.
Well, Spoiler alert, Bret the Hitman Hart wins the match. Absolutely no shocker there whatsoever, because the next pre-tape segment is actually the highlight of the show, the WrestleMania report with Mean Gene Okerlund, and the graphics are still there, not scratched out, featuring Bret Hart holding the belt, pimping his match with Yokozuna. And then at the end of this, Mean Gene and Macho Man have a very time-stamped interaction, making jokes about Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco. And again, this is what's going on in the world in 1993. If you want to know more about that, you're gonna have to read the Wikipedia page yourself. I'm done with it. But it was a
Which I did
oh
because I was so bored during this episode of Raw. I was just Googling everything. Do you know that Joey Buttafuoco has a connection to the pro wrestling world?
you're gonna tell me about it right now.
Yep. He fought China in a celebrity boxing match on the Fox network.
Oh God. Okay.
Let's move on.
So next we move on to a supposedly live interview from the beaches of Hawaii as Vince McMahon is throwing questions to Crush to pimp his match coming up at WrestleMania. Very clearly not live, but I thought they did a pretty good job of timing out the questions and responses.
Yeah, great. Crush. He's in Hawaii. He crushes a coconut. He's going to crush Doink. I'm so excited.
Moving
Next
on.
match.
Match number 2. The Birdman, Coco Beware versus the evil clown Doink. They're still insisting on calling Coco Beware the Birdman. I haven't seen his bird for weeks and weeks and weeks, probably not on Raw at all. But overall,
Frankie the Bird had to have died years ago.
but birds live like 89 years. They probably just didn't want to keep him around. Whatever. We're not talking about Coco
Maybe he
Beware's
got
bird.
sick of lugging that bird through the airport, Dave. I don't know.
Well,
He does still flap his arms like a bird, so there's that.
it was a decent match. It was a very short match, but it told the story they wanted to tell with just Doink doing Doink things. And Vince actually was trying to build him up by saying, "You're going to see some wrestling moves that you've never seen before," as Doink does a typical hold after a typical hold. But the match sort of came and it went, but the finish was strange. Doink got into this hold where it looked like he was pinching Coco Beware's Achilles tendon, making Coco tap out. Yeah, maybe someone was just screaming, "Wrap it up, fellas, go home."
Yeah, that terrible move is called the stump puller, and he does use it for, his part of his heel run here, does Doink. Doink is getting the monster push. I mean, it seems silly because he is a wrestling clown, and we know how the Doink gimmick is going to end up. Spoiler alert, it's going to end up terrible. But in the beginning, the idea of this kind of like schizophrenic evil clown thing, serial killer kind of looking clown. I mean, it was good. He was getting title matches with Bret Hart on the house shows for a while here in early 93, which was probably a little too much of a push for the guy. But I mean, whatever. They're building him up to face Crush, which, I mean, it's fine. I've already forgotten what the whole issue is between those two. I mean, I know Doink hit him with a cast, but I mean, they really milked that one attack for all it was worth to build this WrestleMania match. And I just thought of this. Coco Beware's the Birdman.
Yeah.
They had Terry Taylor, the Red Rooster, on the roster. They could have done a bird tag team. How did they never team up Coco and the Rooster?
Rooster was probably racist or something. I don't know.
Missed opportunities.
But
hey, but you know what? Doink didn't miss an opportunity to abuse Rob Bartlett. That was good.
No, after the match, Elvis got to interview Doink and then got a pie to the face. Oh, hilarity. Hilarity, because it was comedy. But here's the strange part about that. Instead of handing the guy a towel for the rest of the episode, every time they cut to Rob Bartlett, he's still wearing pie. That's got to be gross after the first 4 minutes. How did he spend the next 40 minutes of his life covered in pie?
How did he spend hours of his life broadcasting this show?
Well,
that, by the way, Dave, that's comedy with a K, I think.
It's
like when you go to the frozen section of the store and you buy wings, only they spell it with a Y and a Z.
Yeah.
That's comedy with a K. Not really, but sort of.
Unintentional comedy came next. Money Incorporated worked their way out to the ring, and the $1 Million Man spent minutes of our lives talking about the CEO of American Express and his golden parachute, and the fact that it's an insult that he only makes $700,000 a year now. It's a timely reference. $1 Million Man is trying to prove that he's the elite, but it took a long time to get there, and the punchline didn't really pay off. And the whole point of Money
Yeah, that must have also been in the news this week, I guess. That American Express thing? I don't remember anything about this.
Probably, but I mean, the whole point of bringing Money Inc. out to interview with Vince McMahon, Vince actually straight up asks, "What about it? Are you going to put the titles on the line at WrestleMania against what are the Ultimate Maniacs or the Hulk Hogan Brutus the Barber Beefcake tag team?
The Mega
The Mega
Maniacs.
Maniacs. Are you going to put the titles on the line?" Did anyone realistically think the answer would be no?
Well, I mean, they are heels, so maybe they would have said no. I don't know. I'm so over this. I mean, IRS and DiBiase are trying, and the thing is, they're the heels, and they're not even wrong. They're there. I mean, IRS straight up says we just wanted to see if Brutus could handle having a wrestling match. I mean, sure, maybe they didn't need to hit him in the face with a metal briefcase, but I mean, like, they're not wrong. If the guy can't stand getting hit in the face one time, he shouldn't be wrestling. I'm so over this. And how many more weeks do we have till WrestleMania?
Many. At least 4 more episodes. WrestleMania is April the 4th coming up, so we've got,
Oh,
unless there's another dog show, we've got many, many more weeks of build to WrestleMania.
yeah, I'm so over this. What's next?
Match number 3, the narcissist Lex Luger versus some guy named PJ Walker. They try to build up that they're really working this narcissist gimmick. There's the floor length mirror right by the ring as he admires himself before the match starts. They shoot this blonde woman in the front row who they're trying to, like, you could tell the cameraman probably talked to her and is like, "Hey, when this guy comes out, I need you to look at him with lust in your eyes, okay?" And they cut to her and she looks at Lex Luger
Care
and
less.
she doesn't care at all. So it's like it's it's a visual shrug. She's like, "Him? Really? Him?" That's,
And, you know, Dave, PJ Walker, the jobber who Luger squashes here, he's actually not just some guy.
his name is PJ
Um,
Walker and he's wrestling a guy whose entrance takes longer than the match. How can it not?
I mean, don't get me wrong, PJ Walker here is clearly a jobber, but he will go on to. I mean, let me list PJ's future accomplishments. No spoilers here, but he will actually be involved in a storyline over the Intercontinental title before the end of the year. I don't know if the angle with PJ Walker happens on Raw or on Superstars, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. He later gets repackaged with another gimmick that we will definitely see on Raw in like 94, 95. And then he will end up in ECW, where he is, in fact, future ECW World Heavyweight Champion, Justin Credible.
No, really?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, then and you saw it here first.
And then we have another future World Wrestling Federation champion. I'm, of course, talking about the future light heavyweight champion, Gilbert,
Dwayne,
is in a match.
match number 4. This is for an episode that really kind of sucked. We did get a lot of wrestling this week. Match number 4 with the Steiner brothers taking us home versus Barry Hardy and Dwayne Gill, back when Dwayne Gill actually had hair. I'm using air quotes there. You can't see them, but he did have hair on his head. It's the last match of the day, and it was a steaming pile of something. There was no. The whole thing about these early episodes of Raw that really bugs me is that there's no build to it. We started with the WWF title on the line and the biggest names in the company, and we're ending with Dwayne Gill getting stomped on by the Steiner brothers in neon Zubaz clothing.
Yeah, they did that a lot. Starting with the main event, and then it kind of like just all dies from there. I don't get it. Maybe the thought is that most people are watching the show in the very beginning, so you start with like the most important hot thing. They would bounce back and forth on doing that in these early Raws, and even into the Nitro days, they would like start opening with the best match to hope to like take eyeballs away from Nitro. But this show, I mean, yeah, we had a lot of wrestling, but it was mostly squash matches. They were boring squash matches. I mean, even this one, the Steiners always have a fun squash match because they just destroy these poor idiots. But I think they had like a modicum of respect for Hardy and Gill because they're around as jobbers all the time. They're not just like random nobodies who
Hmm.
the Steiners could murder. So like there wasn't even like a cool spot where like it looked like someone died. It was boring. Though Scott wins it with his cool
Yeah,
Frankensteiner, which I know you
that was
like.
actually a really cool move. It's like
Yeah, he
a Hurricane Rana, but straight on and not a twist or something. It's pretty.
Yeah, I mean the Scott Steiner. I mean, I know you're new to early '90s Scott Steiner, but he was so different than 2000 Scott Steiner that couldn't move, and he was the guy who popularized that Hurricanrana in America for American wrestlers with the Frankensteiner, which was like a revolutionary move at the time. That move was a big deal when he started busting that out in the States. So yeah, that's the highlight, and I mean that's literally that's it for Raw. Do you have more, Dave?
Well, We're going to wrap up the episode with a brand new segment that I want to start. It's called, Neil, let me ask you something, okay? And
All
here's
right.
how it works. I ask you a question about something that I watch these episodes and it bothers me. So, Neil, here's your question for this week. These old Raw episodes, we don't get the commercials because it's obviously tape delayed and on demand, and who needs to watch, commercials from the USA Network about Quantum Leap reruns? But
Sure.
but they still show us the commercials. Every week at the same segment between the two matches, we get an ICO Pro commercial with Bret Hart talking about, lifting weights and being healthy. We get an old wrestling toy commercial. We get like a promo for the Saturday morning WWF show, and we get the Slim Jim commercial. We can't fast forward these. These are in the episode. Why do we have these commercials in the episode?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, and I mean, first of all, we'll open this up on the Facebook page in case I'm wrong on these. Let me ask you some things. But I think what is happening here, I think that they made just the artistic choice when they uploaded this stuff to the network to leave in some of the kind of fun, nostalgic, like specifically WWF commercials. Like that's why you get the action figure commercials and like the ICO Pro spots because they're kind of a part of the show. Like they have wrestlers on it. There is a little nostalgia there. I don't mind that because it's like they're all quick and whatever. The Slim Jim one is interesting. I mean, I see leaving that for nostalgia because everyone remembers Randy Savage and the snap into a Slim Jim. So I don't have any problem with that commercial being randomly thrown in there. I'm just wondering about like as far as the rights to these goes. So I'm gonna guess Slim Jim paid the WWF to do that spot and that's taking up like the WWF portion of the show because just thinking about it like we're radio professionals, like when you get a syndicated show like in radio, there will be some spots already edited into the show and then there'll be others that the station gets to add. So I'm thinking that's how these Raws work. Like Raw, like WWF got the money from Slim Jim, so that's in their part of the show. Like it would be up to them. They could air at 30 seconds of Randy Savage snap into a Slim Jim commercial they got paid for, or they could air 30 more seconds of the Lex Luger PJ Walker match, whereas USA then gets to sell the rest of the time. So I think the USA sold time, we're not ever going to see those commercials because that's where you're going to get whatever big red gum or whatever they were advertising in the mid 90s there. Bud Ice, I don't know what they were advertising on Raw in the mid 90s, but the ones that WWF actually had some control over, I'm thinking that's why those are edited into the shows on the network. And it's mostly just a nostalgia thing, I think.
Fair enough. Asked and answered. So that brings us to the MVP portion of the week. My MVP, the man who we saw first, Bret the Hitman Hart. He's the champ. He did a pretty good job in his match, did a remarkable job of carrying a storyline through most of the first 15 minutes of the episode. Bret Hart, my MVP this week. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at our little Google Doc spreadsheet that we use to keep track of these shows, and I see that I didn't even bother voting for an MVP for this week. So that's how bored I was by the end of this show. So I'll agree with you. Let's go with the Hitman, Bret Hart. Let's give him a vote. 2 votes for Bret Hart for MVP.
ChRAWnology episode 7 in the books. Next week, episode 8. What do we have to look forward to next week?
Well, I could actually tell you what we have to look forward to because when I went to watch this show, I accidentally started watching the wrong show. So we open up with Money Inc. versus El Matador and Virgil, and they have a pretty fun match. But we're also going to see apparently Mr. Perfect and Rick the Model Martel, who we haven't seen in a while here. So that actually, I mean, that sounds like that should be a really good match. So hopefully a better episode of Raw to come next week. And we always try to give you a better episode of ChRAWnology in the next week. We will strive for that as well.
We're giving you a half-assed effort week in and week out. You're welcome.
Yes. It's like a quarter of an ass.